Welcome to COVID and Technology and School Climate. We're going to be talking a little bit about the work that our coalition has done around technology during COVID specifically, and how technology has impacted communities, families, and children in the public school system. Our group today is made up of the coalition, but individual organizations. So I'm going to have Liz introduce Dignity in Schools campaign first, and then I'll hand it over to Khulia. And then I think the three of us can make up for Twin Cities and Midwest Center, since they are not physically representing today.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I'm a member of the coordinating committee at the Dignity in Schools campaign. I'm based in New York City, Pipeline. So we're made up of youth, parent, and intergenerational grassroots organizing groups. We also have advocacy and policy organizations, as well as educators in our coalition. And we, as a coalition, take collective action, doing a National Week of Action that happened a few weeks ago, but also coming together around national campaigns such as Community Not Cops to remove police from schools, Solutions Not Suspensions to reduce suspension and push out of young people, and then implementing positive approaches like restorative justice. So yeah, it's great to be with you all today.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to hand it to Khulia.
Yep, my name is Khulia Pringle. I am based in Minnesota. I work full-time as the state director for the National Parents Union, and then I created a grassroots organizing group of parents called Stand Up, meaning standing together and never divided. And I pretty much provide one-on-one support to families as they navigate the education system, provide training for parents to close the information gap, as well as organizing and mobilizing families to actually transform the education system so it works for all children.
Thank you, Khulia. My name is Ruth Idakula. I am program director of the Dignity in Schools campaign. I've been program director for a couple of years, but I have a long history with the Dignity in Schools campaign. I was a member for a good decade before I was hired on staff. But I have been doing organizing work on the ground here in New Orleans, where I've lived for a good 25 years now. My background is in public education advocacy and also racial justice. We also wanted to introduce Twin Cities Innovation Alliance and also the Midwest Center for School Transformation. Liz or Khulia, since you're on the ground in the Twin Cities, do you want to share a little bit about who they are and what they do?
Liz, can you take that?
Sure. Yeah. So Twin Cities Innovation Alliance and Midwest Center have been members of Dignity in Schools for many years, and they are really the member who's been the lead in our project work around COVID and technology. They have taught us a lot at DSC about the impacts of technology and surveillance and data sharing on education, both the good and the bad. And so when we, coming out of COVID, when we decided to start this research project around the impacts of technology, they have been our lead partner. So we just want, and I know they're also lead in developing the whole conference today and tomorrow. So I just wanted to acknowledge them and all the amazing work they do, and that they've really been part of this work for us.
Thank you, Liz. So next we are going to go into a little bit of the history of the COVID and Technology Participatory Research Project that we've been engaging in the past year or so. I also wanted to share with everybody that as we are talking and sharing, you can definitely, if you have a question in the chat, I'll be looking out to see and answer them as we move along, but just feel comfortable interrupting us if you have any questions with regards to anything that we're talking about as we move along. So I'll kick it over to Liz, who's going to kind of share with us the beginnings of this project.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So the Dignity in Schools campaign has been around since 2006, and really from the very beginning of our work, the importance of technology and data in education has always been present. And I think for us working on the school to prison pipeline, making sure that school districts were collecting and sharing publicly data and information about suspensions, about school-based arrests, about other forms of discipline, and disaggregating that by race, gender, and other indicators has always been hugely important to our work, as well as making sure that students and families have access to technologies in their schools and at home to make sure they can learn. So I think it's always been there, but I would say in the last 6 or 7 years working with the Midwest Center and others, we've seen ways that new technology and ways of sharing information and tracking students and families can also raise significant concerns. And so I think Midwest Center helped really open our eyes to the ways that new data algorithms and data systems can be used to discriminate against students and families. And what might seem like a good idea about tracking how a student is moving through the system, what kind of disciplinary issues they've had and who they've been referred to, if that data is shared between districts and police departments and other social services in a city, it can cause a lot of harm where you're actually tracking, criminalizing, and discriminating against certain students and their families. So we were already starting to explore that more, I think, pre-pandemic, but then when COVID hit, and schools closed down and districts started shifting to remote learning or other forms of hybrid learning, we saw that these concerns started increasing. So there was more online surveillance of students. Schools were collecting more information, giving out devices where families were giving access to information that was being used on those devices. So, you know, when COVID started and we started talking to our members about what impact this was having on schools, we put out a report in late 2021 or late 2020, excuse me, that talked about all the different ways education was being impacted. And one of the things that came up in it was this issue of technology. And so after we released that report in late 2020, we decided it would be good if we could dive deeper into this intersection of COVID, technology, education, surveillance, school discipline, and what that looks like in communities. And as a coalition, we decided that we wanted to use participatory action research. And this is an approach to research that I think several of our members have used over the years in their local work, but we had never done it collectively as the Dignity in Schools campaign. So it's the first time we did it. So I'll just share a little bit about what CPAR is for those who don't know. And then I think I can turn it over to Khulia to share a little bit as well. So community participatory action research has its roots in popular education, and it's a partnership approach to research that involves community members, organizations, researchers equally in the process of research. And it's really about developing the research questions with community, having it be informed by the experiences of community members who are shaping it, and then it's community members themselves who go out and do the research and gather the information from others. And the goal of doing it is to explicitly impact policy and create change that benefits those members of the community. So I think what we're trying to do through the project and what often happens is, you know, you're gathering information about what's happening, but also what members want to see change, or what local communities want to see change, and what solutions they're promoting. So some of the assumptions that go into CPAR that really informed our process is that all people have valuable knowledge about their lives and experiences that they bring to the process of both developing the research questions, but also being the students and parents who are interviewed and fill out surveys to contribute. All people have the ability to develop strong critical analysis. All people have multiple identities and carry important histories. All people and institutions are embedded in complex social, cultural, and political systems that are historically defined by power and privilege. The production of knowledge is not objective or value-free. Social research is most valid when you use multiple methods that are interconnected to study an issue. Participation is not automatic. So we'll talk a little bit about this later, like making sure everyone who's participating feels really comfortable and can stop at any time if they don't want to anymore. And that change is an ongoing process. And so I think what's been great is that by using CPAR, yes, we're gathering data and information about this intersection of COVID and technology, but we're also building relationships. We're bringing more folks into the movement to end the school to prison pipeline. And the goal of when we're finished and we have all the information is to share it back out and try to inform policy and organizing around the country. So that's a little bit about the origins of the project in DSC, how we got here, and going back maybe a little bit to the ways that DSC first came to looking at the potential negative impacts of things like data sharing and technology. Maybe I'll just turn it over to Khulia, I think, if you want to share anything about that trajectory and how you came to understand this issue and what led you to get involved in this project.
Yeah, so initially I was involved in Ramsey County. Our county attorney had decided that he was going to audit his data when it came to who and what type of children was getting referred to the criminal or the juvenile justice system. And he started out that work convening all of the stakeholders, judges, organizations that kids were getting referred to, JDC, and trying to come up with solutions. And then they went on this community engagement tour, and I was a part of that and invited many of the community to this tour. And the idea, again, was, we thought at the time, was to gather information about how the criminal justice system could be reformed, and how students could be not referred to that system, but get the services that they need. The next thing I knew was that they used that forum, the community engagement, to come up with what was called the Joint Powers Agreement. And to me, it felt like this agreement was held in behind closed doors. I believe it wasn't public. And the Joint Powers Agreement was an agreement between the school district, the county, the city. Yeah, so those three entities. And initially, the way it was put out, it was so that these organizations, these systems, could share information about a particular student who may be flagged, or a parent who may be flagged. And then supposedly they will be getting resources, but nobody knew where the resources were coming from, who was going to be the person in charge of the resources, how would the system know if a child is being flagged for discipline. How do we know that it's not racism existing when we do know that there are disparities when it comes to objective school discipline? So we saw a lot of issues when it comes to this Joint Powers Agreement. And this was sort of the beginning of this data collection knowledge that we had. We organized to stop this Joint Powers Agreement from going any further than what it had, and we were successful. And since then, as Liz has said, Dignity in Schools, we've been diving deep into technology, surveillance, and things that happen. Yes, go ahead, Angel.
Just clapping for you. It's a big
Oh,
success.
you were clapping. I'm sorry. So yeah, that was the beginnings of this work.
I do want to add, just to give some larger cultural and historical context, is that while this was happening in the Twin Cities, we're also dealing with the uprising that was happening nationally after the murder of George Floyd, and the big push in Minnesota to remove any kind of law enforcement in public schools at the time. So just to keep that in mind in terms of what was happening on the ground then. Thank you, Khulia.
And to piggyback on that, immediately after that, the two biggest districts in the state did remove police officers from St. Paul and Minneapolis public schools.
Thank you, Khulia, for sharing that. So we are going to go into the steps that we, kind of the process that we went through, that we wanted to share with you. And I am going to hand it off to Khulia to take us through. And, please let us know if you have any questions as we go through it. Take it away, Khulia.
Yeah, so I was a part of the actual doing the CPAR, the Community Participatory Action Research project. And so the first step is to build community and relationships. And I've been fortunate enough for the last 5 years, that's what I've been doing. That's a part of my work. So I've, had to build the community relationships together, define the research questions. And some of the questions was, what new technologies are being used for remote learning in schools? And I need to move this screen around so that I could see. It won't move. Okay. What new technologies are being used for remote learning in schools and what impacts are they having on education, both immediate and long-term? How are school discipline practices impacted by that technology? And how are those technologies contributing to the marginalization or the criminalization of Black and Brown youth in schools? What disparities are there in access to technology across race, class, geography, and other indicators? And how is that impacting student learning and discipline? And what community-driven policy strategies can be used to impact, monitor, and make transparent the use of new technologies to protect the rights of students and families? So the research questions were developed in a communal way. And sometimes that takes a while because everybody has a question that they want to have asked. So that was a process. But I like this process because everybody's voice is being heard when it comes to defining the research questions together. Then applied for grants, and I'm not sure if that was the DSC part did apply for grants, and then we as the folks that were participating in the or going to be doing the research also applied for a grant that DSC received. We designed the research methods, usually qualitative. So we did surveys, interviews, and focus groups, and archival data, maps, oral histories, participant observations, etc. Then we recruited participants, and that was done by in various ways. We had online surveys. Me personally, as I said, I've been able to, for the last 5 years, like my main focus have been going into not just communities that look like mine, but communities that are part of the BIPOC family, as well as low-income families, regardless of race. So recruiting participants, I recruited families that I worked with or supported, I should say, and then reached out to teachers, and then asked for their support, reached out to nonprofits, asked for their support. And right now we are at the collect the data stage.
Thank you, Khulia. I want to, I see Angel has her hand raised. You want to share your
I actually do
question?
have a question this time. Thank you. I'm curious because we do similar work. When you're gathering or you were gathering your group to identify the research question, just when you knew that you had enough people there to do that, and then to then move forward into the design of the kind of evaluation, the design research methods section. Yeah, so you've got the build community and relationships, and then together define the research questions. If you had any suggestions on that, like how do you know when that group is representative enough or big enough or small enough or powerful enough to move forward to the next step?
Yeah, I could start and then others jump in. I think for DSC, part of the way we figure that out is by using the membership like practices and processes that we already had in place. So, and so similarly in any local organization, you may have already strategies for how you interact with your base and your membership. So for DSC, once there was a small group of us from staff and the leadership committees, we already have like an elected national leadership body. So that group first talked about the idea of this project. And then we formed like a little advisory committee with Midwest Center to dive deeper into it. And then once we had an idea of what the project could be, we share the information with our full membership, and we use some of our monthly conversations to say, these are the types of questions that we are thinking of broadly that we want to gather information on. What input or suggestions do you have? So we did that like first level of really broad outreach to make sure that we had generally the right idea for the project. And then what we did is put out a application process for members who actually wanted to dive deep to join the project. And then, as Khulia said, like they were able to get pass-through grant funds once they signed up for the project. So part of our calculation and how many people to have, we wanted some geographic diversity, but we also recognized that it was going to be a lot of work. So we didn't want to put pressure to have like dozens and dozens of communities participating when we knew even just doing it in a couple of places with a few organizations would be a lot of work. And for member groups who are already so busy on the ground, doing their local work, it was hard to add something else. So what we ended up with was 5 organizations across 4 different states. So there was a Khulia's organization in Minnesota, and then we had a member in Virginia, member from two different members in Mississippi from different communities in that state, and then a member from Chicago. So we had 5 organizations represented, and that group of people, I think probably for most of them, there was at least one staff person, but then also a couple members, like so either parent or youth members. And that was the group. So it was the advisors from the leadership committee, and then member representatives from those 5 organizations, both staff and like parent and youth reps, who was the group that we settled on to then actually dive in and design the surveys and the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. And also, just in keeping with the principles of DSC and the way that we think that institutions such as DSC that are supporting grassroots organizations on the ground is that, making sure that they are compensated for the work that they do. And so the grant money, really went to the 5 groups on the ground who were doing this work. We are committed to making sure that whatever grant money that we have, a fourth of it goes to our members through, general support funds. So just wanted to add that in terms of that was also part of the process as well.
Thank you.
So I think, as Khulia said, we are in data collection, so we have not yet gotten to data analysis and interpretation or dissemination. That's going to happen in 2023, but I think after we talk a little bit more about the process, we will share some of what, we've already seen just during gathering the research. But yeah.
Questions to ponder together throughout the process. So these were the questions that we would go over again and again as we talk through the process with the 5 member groups. And this was over a series of months where we really got to internalize what it is that we were trying to do, what information we were trying to get, how we were going to use it, and how we were going to be in relationship with the communities that we were engaging with and getting this information from to be able to do this project. So the first one was, what is the purpose of the research? And I know that Liz and Khulia, there were a couple of questions that I think that you both volunteered to dive into. So just stop me as I go through them. Yeah.
Yeah, I could do with.
Go ahead.
I could start with the first one. What is the purpose of the research? I think for me, it was like, what was the impact? Like what happened during distance learning? How does that differ with prior to distance learning? And then what happened after distance learning during school reopening as far as school climate and technology?
Right.
And I think for the second one about who does the research want to reach, educate, and provoke to action, and where do collectively we seek to incite change. So I think for us, it's a couple different audiences. Certainly part of it was to help share information with the rest of our membership, with the other grassroots groups that are part of the coalition, so that they could learn, what are the 5 members in those 5 school districts seeing, and how can you ask similar questions in your district about what technology was introduced during COVID, and how is it still being used? What are the different online platforms where schools are still sharing and accessing and gathering information about students and families? So part of it, I think, was internal education among our membership. And then certainly we want to also share the findings publicly with the broader education and racial justice community, but also with policymakers to talk about, here are problems with the way data and technology is being used that families and students, and we're interviewing some educators as well, are facing, and here are solutions and ways that you can adjust that. And as DSC, typically, whether we're doing like a formal research project or just gathering information from our members, we always gather both information from members about what the problem is, but also the solutions we want to see. And then we may take the results of this and use it as a starting point to craft like a national platform or policy statement, which we have for a lot of our campaigns, that members can sign on to and take to their own districts and say, these are the recommendations from our national coalition. How can we work together to move some of these in our community? So that's some of the ways we plan to use the research when it's done.
And then who is the community? Who represents and speaks for the community? Are there institutional, organizational, other social dynamics that privilege some voices over others? For me, who is the community and who represents and speaks for the community are folks that are most impacted or facing the disparities. That's the community I seek to go to when I'm doing community engagement. Those who are traditionally marginalized, those who are being criminalized by the policies and practices when it comes to school climate. And there are institutional and organizational, traditionally and currently, that do value privileged voices over others. So for me, it was very important to make sure voices outside of that are involved in this process.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Khulia. How might the research be used and or misused? What warnings, cautions against misuse can be inserted? I think, unfortunately, as people have been doing this work for a long time, and I think that Liz and Khulia can speak to this as well, and please chime in. That, for instance, one of our platforms is Community Not Cops. And for years now, I think up until and since its inception, about 16 years ago, DSC has been collecting data around law enforcement in schools and how that impacts children and how it impacts the climate. But we've seen how some of that research has been used to advocate for law enforcement in schools, because people can lift up, different aspects of the research, to kind of prove their point around, the issues around safety. Well, we all believe in safety in schools, but what does that actually look like? And I think that's one example in which the way that, research can be twisted to fit another narrative. Liz or Khulia, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Brad just asked the same question. How do you build the relationship? And I think it would vary across the different organizations, but I believe that we all do some sort of parent engagement or family engagement already. So again, the families that we work with trust us. And I think that trust is very important when you're doing research, because in our communities, I feel like I'm a history teacher as well, and I'm a history buff. And when I go back, I just see all of the videos and stuff in the 70s and the 80s where, the camera, every time something happens, a crime goes up, there's a camera or some sort of university in the faces of poor people, exploiting them, but nothing ever happens as far as like what these families need in order to change their situation. And so for me, it was important that I was the messenger and I was a trusted messenger, and that families understood that I wasn't going to be exploiting them. Whatever suggestions and research that they gave me was going to go in the Dignity in Schools research package and for us to advocate nationally. But we're going to use what we're doing to advocate at the school level and at the district level, right where we are. So it's not a situation where I'm collecting your data and you're telling me a story and then I'm doing something with it, then you have to wait. No, we're going to do something about it right now. And so that was one of the ways that I was able to build rapport with community.
Thank you, Khulia. Yeah, so all of our members have been doing on the ground work for a lot of them for sometimes decades. And so we are always very careful with anything that even looks close to this, that we are asking people who are anchored in communities and have built some trust over time with their communities. But I think that that's an absolutely beautiful question, Brad, because I think that that needs to be lifted up more in terms of just research in general. Super important. Who is made vulnerable by the research?
I think I sort of touched on that. Like I said, it's those who are impacted by the research who's most vulnerable. Because as Liz pointed out, that research could be used in a different way to say something else. And if I'm a person and I'm exposing my life and myself to you to do good with it, and then somebody else takes it to then bring me further down into the hole that I'm already in, that's not cool. So
Right.
yeah, I feel like communities who are already, they're impacted by the disparities, that's who's most vulnerable to the research.
Yeah. How will we get informed consent from the participant? This was a very, very sensitive and important piece for us because we do not want to be abusers or users of our communities, right? And so there was several pieces of documentation that I think parents could sign, or parents with minors or students could sign to be able to either stay anonymous or to be able to, if people were freely willing to, give up their names, if they wanted that to be added to the research in any way. But also, we were very clear that we wanted to be able to protect people and their stories, because I think that most of us know the ways in which you speaking out about anything that you can, definitely become a target from that. So we were very, very careful to make sure that we were not participating in that in any way. Liz, you want to share anything else about that? Informed consent piece?
I think we also were just careful to ask, to be clear, we would destroy the raw data and keep people's
Right.
names confidential. And we're actually doing a new participatory project now where we're videotaping as an option to create videos, but we're really being careful about giving people options. Like if you don't want to be videotaped, that's okay. We can just do audio or even just written notes. And we could also just use your voice, but not your face. So we're trying to we want to use different dynamic methods for sharing the information, but at the same time, really protect everybody's identity and only share what they are comfortable with.
How do we ensure that community participants are not harmed during the research and gain as much benefit as possible through participation? One of the things that we offered were gift cards with, I forget the amount, but, just a little bit of compensation for people who are willing to share their stories, for participation. Who owns the data that is collected? Where will it be stored? And for how long? And how do we protect the privacy of participants in collection and sharing processes? We talked a little bit about that. The data is going to be, it's collected, of course, by our 5-member organizations. It's going to be stored with Dignity in Schools campaign temporarily until we can come to a consensus after we've analyzed the data about who shares it, how, and where it lives. Don't want to miss the comments here. So hard when you want to share notes with wider stakeholders who can't come to, right? Exactly. Sharing any best practices on compensation for participants would be greatly appreciated. Gotcha. We really try to be creative around what people need and want. A lot of times, we will ask, what is it that DSC can offer, to kind of, offer some kind of a form of gratitude and thanks for even being part of the process. But for the most part, I think that at the very least that what we do is that we can share gift cards with a certain amount of money on them. With different projects that could look like anything from $100 to, a few $100s.
And
I
for
would
this,
Go ahead.
I would just add transportation costs,
Right.
food. Those are just basic things, like people appreciate that when you feed them, they're taking the time out to talk to you. You make sure they're fed, you make sure they, if it's, if you're meeting with them in person, or if it's a focus group, everybody's compensated for their gas, and as well as they receive a small stipend for their time.
yeah, and I was just
And-
going to say, when we've had larger numbers, we sometimes have had to do smaller amounts of $25 for focus group participants. When we did a big national survey, which is part of this project, our goal was like hundreds and hundreds of youth to fill it out. So we knew we wouldn't be able to give everybody, but we advertised it with a raffle where, like, at the end, we'll raffle 50 gift cards for everybody, right? So 50 people who fill it out will get a gift card. So at different levels, depending on how many people, like if we could give everybody $100 gift card, which we have done for some things, it would be great. But sometimes we have to go lower, but still try to make as much available to everyone. And as Khulia said, with those other expenses too.
And I would say, just in terms of general best practices, to meet participants where they are. So wherever that participant feels comfortable, whether it's going to their home or meeting at a particular designated place with other people, just doing as much as you can to make it comfortable and make it as accessible as possible. Because, as we all understand, a lot of these communities are struggling with a lot, and some of that is poverty. So I think just doing anything that you can to kind of help to fill the gaps and make it easier for folks to participate.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did somebody say something?
Just thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Who among us has the equipment and tools we might need? For example, multilingual survey platform, recorders for interviews, capacity to transcribe recorded interviews, etc. And so the way that we were able to gather the survey, so there was an online survey that people were able to access that we sent out to our entire membership, which then also members of our coalition then forwarded to their networks. We made sure that we had Spanish translation for the online survey. And I think speakers of a language other than Spanish, I think we were able to get, please tell me, let me know if this was a true story, that we're able to get translators. Because I know that in the Twin Cities that there are a lot of folks who are from the eastern part of Africa. And so they have, they speak other languages other than English and Spanish. And so we're able to see if we could get translators to be there during sessions or data gathering sessions. And for the ability for them to be able to record them. So I think that for the most part, there might have been some, issues that arose with, just using technology in general. But I think for the most part, people were able to upload them via laptop or computer, and then they're being stored in a particular place in our DSC files. How will the findings be presented? In whose voice? How will we ensure that the findings are presented in accessible ways? Because we have not started to analyze the data yet, that is still a conversation that the collective will need to discuss. I think for us, at the very least, though, is that we want to be able to present it so that school districts, stakeholders, law and policymakers can use the data to be able to push for change in school climate across districts at the very least. I know that we only have a few minutes left, so I'm trying to get through this. And then the last question is, who will receive credit for the work conducted? and the results. And it's the community. It's a community that's being impacted. It's a community that's actually doing the research work. So that is where the credit lies. And I think that at the end of the day, that is the value of participatory action research, is that the people are doing the work to collect the data that so that they can shape their own narrative about what is happening to them and what has impacted them, and also to bring the solutions and how to solve the problems. So where are we now and what do we know? I had shared a little bit earlier that we are in the late stages of data gathering. So we have yet to sit down and actually do the analysis of what has shown up. But I think that even just through talking to people, that folks who have been doing the research have, I think, have come up or seen some patterns with regards to what has been happening in the schools with regards to technology over the past 2 or 3 years. And I think Khulia, had some stories or I think insights that she had to share around that.
I could share some insights. One of the main things when it comes to, I think Ruth touched on it a little bit, when folks got the technology, there was surveillance on it and, some things that might be collected on that laptop. And one of the questions was asked, were you given any information? Did you know that this was happening? And I could say most of the time it was a no. Parents didn't know that when they accepted the laptop, they were agreeing to some type of surveillance. And once they did get the laptop, there was a trend where they would get a shock and off, a kid accidentally said a certain word, or if, and the school contacted them, like, what's going on. So that was their first intro into that their technology was being impacted. Another thing that I learned from the teacher perspective was they didn't know what to do. So when it comes to school discipline, you had teachers shutting off computers, things going on in the background, internet connection was bad. And that was the initial thing with distance learning. Like, a lot of folks weren't connected. A lot of folks didn't have the hardware. Districts was trying to figure that out. So it was a debacle initially. I think that was something that I saw. But even during the time, again, teachers didn't have nobody knew what to do when it comes to school climate and trying to do distance learning and how learning was going to happen across in a screen setting. And then another thing that I noticed was new discipline practices was arising with turning the computers off, or dropping folks off, folks getting referred to child protection if they didn't log in. So those were some trends that I saw. Also, parents. So on the teacher side, teachers were seeing what was happening in families' background, but on the parent side, parents were noticing or seeing or not seeing like what was happening in the classroom where their kids learning. So there was a bit learning on both sides when it comes to parents, certain parents seeing things that they had no idea about, but then there were also kids who were flourishing during distance learning because they suffered from social anxiety issues. They didn't have other issues that were going on. So you would see some kids that weren't impacted by it, but then you saw some kids who needed that social interaction and who really struggled. One of the things that I did notice is during reopening, districts weren't ready for that. Schools weren't ready for that. All of the things that happened during distance learning, kids were online for all that time. That was their world. So there was beefs happening that folks didn't come up. So bullying, suspensions, and school climate ran rampant all of the last year running into this school year. So those are the things that I've been noticing based on the research that I've done so far.
One other anecdote I could just share that I heard from a teacher who was participating in the project, and in their district, and I think every school district for many years has had some sort of technology platform where educators enter information if they're referring someone for school discipline or make other notes about students. But the new technology that was introduced during and is now being used post-COVID has a lot more room for the teachers to share all kinds of notes and information about the family and what they've learned. And, you know, and other teachers, even the following year, teachers can look back and read all these notes. And the teacher we spoke with was just so concerned because she felt like, depending on what teacher that is that writes the note and who sees it, you can share all kinds of private information about a family that a parent or a student told you in confidence and is now going to be accessible in an online database that all kinds of staff in the school building can see. And so just sort of like student files that used to be maybe more protected, and at least that her example, she was just very concerned about how that was going to roll out because other teachers could just access so much information about an individual student if teachers put it in the comment section. So there's other examples like that of just new platforms that were introduced and are still being used that don't have adequate protection for that kind of information sharing within the school.
And we wanted to, at this point, open it up to, you know, kind of your experiences based on what we've shared. We wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of share your experiences, what you've learned or experienced during the past couple of years. If there's something that you wanted to share that you felt would be valuable to other folks who joined, yeah, open floor.
I just want to say thank you for sharing everything. It's so much, and I know it's such a big project and you're in the middle of it, but I'm in Duluth and working with the public schools here for our organization. We're helping implement the full service community school model as a way to engage families and stakeholders in the process of school improvement. It's so important to me that we're living those values that you're talking about too, and making sure we're really respecting the input of our stakeholders and that we're really lifting them up as valuable regardless of any check boxes that the school district needs, that we're meeting people where they are, like you're saying, and that it's an ongoing relationship. But it's hard to hold hands with such a huge system at the same time as doing that in the real way we know works. And so all of those questions about like, how do you make that stipend feel real and good and also be consistent and maintain it? And like, how do you get those kinds of releases from people that you can share information that they're sharing with you in a way that's also being respectful is kind of that tension where we live all the time. So I appreciate anybody who's also going through it and values it, giving any advice or tips you've learned. So thanks so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Angel, for doing that work. I just want to offer that, you know, I don't think anybody who's on the team minds you reaching out to us. You can definitely reach out to DSC, myself or Liz anytime. I can actually put my information in the chat, and you can email or call me. I'll leave both.
And are you in Duluth, Minnesota? Yeah, so you could connect with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was looking at your bio and looking at the parent union thing, and that was something new for me. So I'm really curious about that. I might reach out, but thank you all so much.
Oh yeah, we're here to support. Anybody else? And also wanted to, you know, give a shout out to Brad. You know, just reading your comment was just heartbreaking. I mean, for those of us who didn't catch it, you know, Brad used to teach in a non-traditional school where they always struggled on how to support the good kid in a bad situation. And I remember a colleague of mine seriously talking about giving a young person a bat to smash his car window just to open up resources. There's something very, very wrong with that. Thank you for sharing that, Brad. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I was so impressed with just that list of guidelines. And it's like, yes, 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 yes. This is, you know, this is everything the way that it's supposed to be. And it was so nice to see someone going into it with that mindset, that collaborative mindset, and that, we need to bring the community together, because so often it comes in from above. And, I think about, the neighborhoods around universities, and it's like, well, our students could walk to them, therefore you're now our lab,
Right.
without having any respect for the community itself. And I like putting the control back where it belongs. It's meaningful.
Yeah. And we want to encourage people, we know it's not easy, but we can do this, we can, and we should, and we must, because this has got to change. And we have the power to do that. This is part of why we wanted to share the information, because, we wanted to encourage people that, this is something that you can do. This is something you can at least look at, to kind of change and shift the culture and the politics and the resources.
And I realized I had not uploaded the PowerPoint to the Kiko chat. I will, but I also dropped it in the chat if anybody
Thanks,
wants it.
Angel. Be in touch. But thank you for joining us, Brad, Rebecca. Angel had to run. Wonderful to meet you and have you sitting with us and share your comments. Feel free to reach out to us. Liz and I put our information in the chat, and she also put in the slides, so you can, this is for us to share. You can use it in your communities as well.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take good care.
I'm going to disappear now, but
Okay.
do let